The sleek conference room fell silent as Michael Torres's fingers danced across the keyboard with impossible precision. Just 30 seconds earlier, everyone had been laughing. The CTO had just handed this quiet janitor an encrypted laptop and mockingly dared him to crack it. Nobody expected the man who emptied their trash cans to even touch the machine. But now, as lines of code cascaded down the screen faster than anyone could follow, the laughter died in their throats. The same hands that had mopped their floors were dismantling corporate firewalls like tissue paper. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning had started like any other at Zenith Technologies. Michael Torres arrived at 5:30 a.m., just as he had every weekday for the past 3 years. His janitor's cart squeaked slightly as he wheeled it through the pristine hallways of the 40-story tech giant's headquarters in downtown Seattle. The building hummed with the quiet energy of servers and climate control systems, but the human occupants wouldn't arrive for another 3 hours. Michael preferred it this way. The solitude gave him time to think, to remember, and sometimes to forget. At 42, he had perfected the art of invisibility. His gray uniform and methodical movements made him part of the building's infrastructure, as unremarkable as the air conditioning vents or emergency exit signs. He cleaned executive offices where million-dollar decisions were made, emptied trash cans filled with discarded prototypes worth more than his annual salary, and dusted computer monitors that displayed code he could read better than most of the programmers who wrote it. The irony wasn't lost on him. 15 years ago, Michael Torres had been one of the most promising software architects on the West Coast. His name had appeared on patents that revolutionized data encryption. Tech magazines had featured him as a rising star. Venture capitalists had courted him with offers that would have made him wealthy beyond imagination. But that was before the accident, before Sarah died, before everything fell apart. Michael pushed those thoughts away as he entered the executive floor. The quarter office belonged to Eric Donovan, Zenith's chief technology officer. At 34, Donovan was everything Michael had once been: brilliant, ambitious, and completely convinced of his own superiority. His office was a testament to his success: floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, awards and patents displayed like trophies, and 3 large monitors showing real-time data from Zenith's global BE operations. As Michael emptied Donovan's trash, he noticed the scattered papers on the desk: budget reports, security audits, and what looked like termination letters. Business was struggling. Zenith had built its reputation on cybersecurity solutions, but recent breaches at their client companies had damaged their credibility. The board was demanding answers, and Donovan was feeling the pressure. "You know what your problem is, Eric?" The voice belonged to Victoria Chen, Zenith's VP of Operations, who had just entered the office. Michael continued cleaning, his presence so routine that conversations continued around him as if he weren't there. "Enlighten me," Donovan replied, not looking up from his screens. "You think technology is the answer to everything, but half our security failures come from human error. Our employees click on phishing emails, use weak passwords, leave their laptops unlocked. You can build the most sophisticated firewall in the world, but it's useless if someone just hands over their login credentials to the first person who asks nicely." Michael had finished with the trash and was now dusting the bookshelf, but he found himself listening intently. Chen was right. He'd seen the security reports that Donovan regularly discarded. Zenith's clients were being compromised not through sophisticated cyber attacks, but through basic social engineering and poor security practices. "That's why we're implementing mandatory security training for all employees," Donovan said. "Starting with a company-wide demonstration next week. I'm going to show everyone exactly how vulnerable they are. And you think that will solve the problem? I think people need to understand the stakes. When they see how easy it is to crack their systems, maybe they'll take security seriously." Michael finished dusting and quietly left the office. As he moved to the next room, his mind was already working through the implications of what he'd heard. A company-wide security demonstration meant Donovan would be showing off, trying to impress the board with his expertise. But if Chen was right about the human element, Donovan might be missing the bigger picture. The next few days passed normally, Michael cleaned offices, restrooms, and conference rooms while listening to fragments of conversations about the upcoming security presentation. The entire company was buzzing with anticipation. Donovan had been working overtime, preparing what he promised would be an eye-opening demonstration of Zenith's vulnerabilities. Friday afternoon arrived, and the main conference room filled with employees from every department. Michael had cleaned the room that morning, arranging chairs and testing the projection equipment. Now, as the presentation was about to begin, he was in the adjacent supply closet, restocking cleaning supplies. Through the partially open door, he could see and hear everything. Donovan stood at the front of the room like a professor addressing his class. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the Zenith logo, alongside various security statistics. The audience included department heads, senior developers, sales staff, and administrative personnel. Even some board members had attended via video conference. "Ladies and gentlemen," Donovan began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. "Today, I'm going to show you something that will fundamentally change how you think about cybersecurity. We live in an age where a single click can compromise an entire network, where one weak password can lead to millions of dollars in losses." He clicked a remote, and the screen changed to show a news article about a recent data breach at a Fortune 500 company. Tech Global thought they were secure. They spent $50 million on cybersecurity last year, but it took one employee clicking on a malicious email link to give hackers access to their entire customer database. 200 million records compromised. Stock price down 30%. CEO resigned in disgrace. End quote. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Everyone recognized the implicit threat. This could happen to them. "Now," Donovan continued, "I want to demonstrate just how easy it is to compromise a system. I need a volunteer, someone with no technical background, someone who thinks cybersecurity is just about having a good antivirus program." He scanned the room, his eyes settling on Janet from Human Resources. "Janet, you use a computer every day, right? Email, spreadsheets, database queries?" Janet nodded nervously. "I do my job, but I'm not technical at all." "Perfect. Come up here." Janet reluctantly joined Donovan at the front of the room. He had set up a laptop on the table, its screen showing a standard login prompt. "This laptop contains mock data that simulates our actual network structure," Donovan explained to the audience. "Janet, I want you to try to log in. Just guess at the password." Janet looked uncomfortable. "I don't know anything about hacking." "Exactly my point. You're representing the average employee, someone who thinks cybersecurity is someone else's responsibility." Donovan's tone carried a slight edge of condescension. "Just try some common passwords. Password 123 maybe? Or the company name?" Janet tried several obvious combinations, but the laptop remained locked. After a few minutes of failed attempts, Donovan nodded approvingly. As expected, Janet can't break in through guessing, but watch this. He produced a USB drive from his pocket. "This contains a program that can crack weak passwords in seconds. Janet, just plug this in and run the program. Is it safe?" "Completely. It's designed for demonstration purposes only." Janet inserted the USB drive, and within moments, the laptop's desktop appeared. The audience gasped softly, impressed by the speed of the compromise. "There you have it," Donovan said triumphantly. "With basic social engineering, I convinced Janet to run malware on a corporate laptop. In a real attack, this machine would now be completely compromised. The hackers could access our files, steal our data, use this computer as a launching point for further attacks." End quote. He paused dramatically, letting the implications sink in. But the real problem isn't the technology, it's the human element. Janet did exactly what thousands of employees do every day. They trust someone who appears to have authority, and they do what they're asked without teamwork, thinking about the consequences. Janet looked mortified. "I thought you said it was safe." "It is safe in this controlled environment. But my point is that you didn't verify that claim. You just trusted me because I'm the CTO. In a real attack, the person asking you to run that program might be a criminal." The room was quiet, processing the lesson. But Donovan wasn't finished. "Let me show you something even more frightening," he said, pulling up a new screen. "This is a simulation of our actual network architecture. I'm going to demonstrate how an attacker could move laterally through our systems once they gain initial access." For the next 20 minutes, Donovan walked through increasingly sophisticated attack scenarios. He showed how compromised credentials could be used to access sensitive databases, how privilege escalation attacks could give hackers administrator access, and how advanced persistent threats could remain hidden in corporate networks for months. The presentation was impressive. Even Michael had to admit that. Donovan clearly knew his subject matter. But something about his approach bothered Michael. The CTO seemed more interested in demonstrating his own expertise than in teaching practical security measures. His tone when addressing non-technical staff was patronizing, almost hostile. "I know what some of you are thinking," Donovan said, noticing some restless shifting in the audience. "This is too complex, too technical, not your responsibility." But that attitude is exactly why companies get hacked. Every employee is a potential entry point. Every one of you is either part of the solution or part of the problem. He gestured toward the laptop Janet had used. "I've spent years building sophisticated security systems. Firewalls, intrusion detection, behavioral analysis algorithms. But all that work can be undone by one person who clicks the wrong link or uses a weak password." The frustration in his voice was becoming more apparent. The recent client breaches had clearly taken a toll on Donovan's confidence. He was lashing out at the perceived weak links in his security chain. "Maybe," said David Kim from the marketing department, "you could show us some practical steps we can take. Better password strategies, how to identify phishing emails, that sort of thing." Donovan's expression hardened. "David, with all due respect, you manage advertising campaigns. Cybersecurity requires years of specialized training. You can't learn it from a PowerPoint presentation." "I understand that," David replied patiently. "But surely there are basic precautions that don't require a computer science degree." "Basic precautions," Donovan repeated mockingly. "You want a simple checklist you can follow? That's exactly the kind of thinking that gets companies hacked. Criminals are constantly evolving their techniques. They're not going to be stopped by basic precautions." The room was growing tense. Donovan's arrogance was alienating his audience instead of educating them. Michael watched from the supply closet, remembering similar scenarios from his past life. He'd seen brilliant technical experts who could solve any coding problem, but couldn't communicate effectively with non-technical colleagues. "Look," Donovan continued, "I don't mean to be harsh, but this is serious business. Last quarter, cybercrime cost the global economy over $1 trillion. That's not a problem you solve with password complexity requirements and security awareness training. It requires sophisticated technical solutions and constant vigilance by security professionals." "So what are you saying?" asked Sarah Martinez from accounting. "That we're hopeless? That we should just accept that we're going to get hacked?" "I'm saying you should leave cybersecurity to the experts and focus on doing your actual jobs." Donovan's patience was clearly wearing thin. "When you receive security protocols, follow them. When IT tells you to update your software, do it immediately. When security training is mandatory, take it seriously. But don't pretend you understand the complexities of what we're dealing with." The hostile atmosphere in the room was palpable. Donovan had managed to insult virtually everyone while demonstrating his technical prowess. Michael recognized the pattern, a brilliant mind sabotaged by poor bash, people skills, and wounded ego. "Ego. You know what?" Donovan said suddenly. "Let me prove my point in a different way. I'm going to show you just how difficult real cybersecurity work actually is." He pulled out another laptop, this one secured with multiple layers of encryption and advanced authentication protocols. The screen showed a complex interface with various security challenges. "This machine is locked down with enterprise-grade security, military-level encryption, biometric authentication, intrusion detection systems. It would take a team of expert hackers months to crack this, if they could crack it at all." He looked around the room with a challenging expression. "Anyone here think they could break into this system? Anyone want to try their hand at real hacking?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Victoria Chen spoke up. "Eric, I think you've made your point. Maybe we should move on to the practical recommendations you mentioned." But Donovan wasn't ready to back down. The stress of recent failures had pushed him into proving his superiority at any cost. No, I want to make this crystal clear. I want everyone to understand the gap between thinking you know something about computers and actually having the skills to protect a corporation from serious threats. He gestured broadly at the assembled employees. Anybody, take a shot at this laptop. Show me that cybersecurity is as simple as following a checklist. Prove to me that years of specialized training don't matter. The challenge hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. The audience looked embarrassed, trapped between their leader's aggression and their own obvious limitations. Nobody moved to accept the challenge. "That's what I thought," Donovan said with satisfaction. "This isn't a game. This isn't something you can wing or figure out as you go. This requires expertise that took me 15 years to develop." From his hiding spot in the supply closet, Michael felt a familiar surge of anger. He recognized Donovan's type, the technical expert who used knowledge as a weapon to make others feel small. It was the same attitude that had poisoned his own career years ago. What office politics and ego had mattered more than solving problems. But what really bothered Michael was the waste. Donovan clearly understood cybersecurity. But his approach was counterproductive. Instead of empowering his colleagues to be part of the solution, he was alienating them, making them feel helpless and resentful. It was exactly the wrong way to build a security conscious culture. "Come on," Donovan pressed, his voice taking on a taunting edge. "Anyone brave enough to try? I promise I won't laugh when you fail." The room remained silent, but Michael could see the anger building in several faces. Donovan was destroying whatever goodwill might have existed between the technical and non-technical staff. "Fine," Donovan said. "Let me make this even more interesting. Hack this computer, and I'll bow to you. I'll publicly acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, cybersecurity isn't as complex as I've been claiming. I'll admit that perhaps my years of training and experience don't matter as much as I thought." Still no takers. The challenge felt cruel now, designed to humiliate rather than educate. "What about our support staff?" Donovan continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "Maintenance, security guards, cleaning crew. They have access to our offices, our computers. Maybe one of them has picked up some technical skills through osmosis." Michael's jaw clenched. The condescension in Donovan's voice was unmistakable. He was using the support staff as examples of technical incompetence, people so far removed from real expertise that the very idea of their involvement was absurd. "Actually," Donovan said with a cruel smile, "I know exactly who should try this. Michael Torres, our night janitor. He's been cleaning our offices for years, emptying our trash cans, dusting our computers. Maybe he's learned something about cybersecurity from all that exposure to our work." Several people turned to look around the room, but Michael wasn't visible in the main seating area. Some of the attendees shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the mean-spirited nature of the suggestion. "Oh, that's right," Donovan continued. "Support staff aren't invited to presentations like this. They're too busy doing the real work, while we sit around talking about theoretical problems." The sarcasm was bitter, and Michael could see that even Donovan's allies were beginning to look uncomfortable with his behavior. But the CTO was too caught up in his performance to notice. "You know what?" Donovan said suddenly. "Let's make this concrete. Someone go find Torres and bring him up here. Let's give our janitor a chance to show us how easy cybersecurity really is. If he can crack this laptop, I'll personally recommend him for a position in our IT department." Victoria Chen stood up. "Eric, that's enough. This has gone way beyond making your point about security awareness." "Has it?" Donovan shot back. "I don't think people really understand what we're dealing with. They think cybersecurity is just common sense and basic computer skills. Well, here's a chance to prove it. Find me someone with no technical training whatsoever, and let them take a crack at military-grade security protocols." Michael had heard enough. The anger that had been building inside him finally boiled over, not just at Donovan's arrogance, but at the waste of it all. Here was a room full of smart, capable people being made to feel stupid and helpless. Here was a critical security presentation being turned into a "you got arrivin' performance. Here was everything wrong with the tech industry distilled into one painful scene. Before he could think better of it, Michael stepped out of the supply closet. "I'll try it," he said quietly. The room fell silent, heads turned toward the unexpected voice. Michael stood in the doorway, still wearing his gray maintenance uniform, a cleaning rag hanging from his belt. To most of the people in the room, he was practically invisible furniture that had suddenly started talking. Donovan blinked in surprise, clearly not having expected anyone to actually accept his challenge, especially not the janitor he'd been mocking. "I'm sorry, what?" Donovan managed. Michael stepped further into the room, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "I said I'll try it. Your challenge. I'll take a shot at your laptop." The silence stretched longer. Several employees looked confused, wondering why the cleaning man was even in the building during regular business hours. Others seemed embarrassed for Michael, expecting him to humiliate himself in front of the entire company. Donovan recovered his composure quickly, a slow smile spreading across his face. This was even better than he'd hoped. Instead of just making a theoretical point about technical complexity, he was going to demonstrate it with a living example. "Well, well," Donovan said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Torres, right? I have to admit, I wasn't expecting you to take me up on the offer, but I appreciate your enthusiasm." Michael walked toward the front of the room, his footsteps the only sound in the otherwise silent space. He could feel dozens of eyes tracking his movement, some curious, some pitying, all skeptical. "You understand," Donovan continued, "that this isn't like the computers you might use at home. This is enterprise-level security. The kind of system that protects classified government data and financial networks. It's not going to be cracked by guessing passwords or running simple programs." "I understand," Michael replied simply. Donovan gestured toward the laptop with theatrical flourish. "By all means then, show us what you've got. Take all the time you need." Michael approached the secured laptop, his pulse quickening as he looked at the screen. It displayed a complex authentication interface, exactly the kind of multi-layered security system he would have designed in his previous life. Biometric scanners, encrypted key exchanges, behavioral analysis algorithms. It was genuinely sophisticated work. But it was also familiar work. The underlying architecture looked like a variation of the Cerberus protocol, a security framework he'd helped develop 8 years ago during his time at Cybersecurity Industries. If his guess was correct, the system would have the same fundamental vulnerabilities he'd identified back then, weaknesses that had never been fully patched because they were buried deep in the core authentication logic. Michael glanced back at Donovan, who was watching with an expression of barely contained glee. The CTO clearly expected this to be over in seconds, probably as soon as Michael touched the keyboard and realized he was completely out of his depth. "Any particular approach you'd recommend?" Michael asked conversationally. Donovan chuckled. "Well, you could try guessing the password. Fair warning though, it's probably not password 123. A few people in the audience laughed nervously. Michael nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this advice, then placed his hands on the keyboard. The first keystroke sent a shock of recognition through his fingers. It had been 3 years since he'd done any serious programming, but muscle memory was a powerful thing. His hands found the familiar positions, his fingers automatically adjusting to the keyboard's layout and response. He started with basic reconnaissance, probing the system's responses to various inputs. To most observers, it looked like random typing, but Michael was mapping the authentication protocols, identifying the specific implementation details that would tell him exactly what kind of system he was dealing with. Within 30 seconds, his suspicions were confirmed. This was indeed a modified Cerberus system, probably implemented by someone who understood the theoretical framework but hadn't been part of the original development team. They'd made some improvements, added some additional layers, but the core vulnerabilities were still there. Michael's fingers began moving faster, executing a complex sequence of commands that bypassed the standard authentication interface entirely. He was accessing the system through a debug pathway that existed in the original Cerberus specification, a backdoor intended for emergency maintenance that was supposed to be disabled in production environments. The room was completely quiet now, except for the rapid clicking of keys. Michael was vaguely aware that people were leaning forward in their chairs, trying to see what he was doing. But his attention was completely focused on the screen. Lines of code began scrolling past as Michael navigated deeper into the system architecture. He was working in a command line environment now, directly manipulating the security protocols at their lowest level. His hands moved with increasing confidence, executing commands from memory, following pathways through the system that he'd traced dozens of times in development environments years ago. 4 to 5 seconds in, he found the privilege escalation vector he'd been looking for, a buffer overflow in the biometric verification subsystem that could be triggered by sending malformed authentication data. It was the same vulnerability he'd discovered during the original Cerberus testing, the one that had taken the development team 6 months to partially fix. Michael's fingers flew across the keyboard, crafting an exploit that turned the security system's own authentication protocols against themselves. He was writing custom code now, adapting techniques he developed years ago for this specific implementation. The screen flickered momentarily as Michael's exploit triggered the buffer overflow. For a split second, the authentication interface disappeared entirely, replaced by a low-level system prompt that most users would never see. But Michael wasn't most users. He was in his element now, working with the kind of deep system access that required years of specialized knowledge to achieve. His fingers moved without conscious thought, executing a series of commands that systematically dismantled the laptop's security architecture. 1 minute in, Michael had bypassed the biometric scanners entirely, 90 seconds, and he'd neutralized the behavioral analysis algorithms. At the 2-minute mark, he gained administrator privileges and was browsing the system's supposedly encrypted file structure as easily as if it were an open directory. The silence in the room had taken on a different quality. Where before it had been the awkward quiet of anticipated embarrassment, now it was the stunned hush of people witnessing something completely unexpected. Michael could feel the shift in attention, the growing realization that what they were seeing shouldn't have been possible. Donovan's confident smirk had faded, replaced by a look of growing confusion and concern. He stepped closer to the laptop, trying to see exactly what Michael was doing, but the commands were scrolling by too quickly to follow. "What exactly are you doing?" Donovan asked, his voice no longer carrying its earlier condescension. Michael didn't look up from the screen. "Bypassing your authentication protocols," he said matter-of-factly. "The biometric scanner has a buffer overflow vulnerability in its data validation routine. Once you trigger that, you can inject code directly into the authentication service and escalate privileges from there." Donovan blinked. That's not possible. The system was hardened against buffer overflow attacks. "We implemented stack canaries, address space randomization." "You implemented them incorrectly," Michael replied, still typing. "The randomization seed is generated using a predictable algorithm based on system uptime. Once you know the seed, you can calculate the memory layout and craft your overflow payload accordingly." The technical jargon hung in the air. Most of the audience didn't understand the specific details, but they could hear the confidence in Michael's voice. The casual way he discussed vulnerabilities that their CTO had claimed were impossible to exploit. 2.5 minutes after he'd started, Michael executed his final command sequence. The laptop's desktop appeared, unlocked and fully accessible. But he wasn't finished. With a few more keystrokes, he pulled up the system's audit logs, then methodically deleted every trace of his intrusion. To anyone examining the laptop later, it would appear as if the security had simply been disabled by an authorized administrator. Michael straightened up and stepped back from the laptop. "Done," he said simply. The room erupted. Not in applause, but in a cacophony of shocked voices, questions, and exclamations. People were standing up, pointing at the screen, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Donovan stared at the unlocked laptop in disbelief. "That's impossible," he muttered. That system was secured with military-grade protocols. It would take a team of experts weeks to crack those encryption algorithms. "I didn't crack the encryption," Michael explained patiently. "I bypassed it. The authentication system has design flaws that allow privilege escalation through memory corruption attacks. Once you have administrator access, the encryption is irrelevant because the system decrypts data automatically for authorized users." "But how did you—" Donovan started to ask. then stopped. He was beginning to realize that his assumptions about the man in the maintenance uniform might have been catastrophically wrong. Michael looked around. The room at the sea of stunned faces. 3 years of invisibility had been shattered in less than 3 minutes. There was no going back to being just the janitor now. "You asked how I knew about the vulnerabilities," Michael said, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden quiet. "I know because I helped design the original Cerberus protocol that your security system is based on. I was the lead architect on the authentication framework. I'm the one who discovered most of the vulnerabilities you thought you'd patched." The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Donovan's face went pale. "That's impossible," he repeated weakly. "The Cerberus protocol was developed by Cyberdyne Industries. The team lead was—" He stopped, his eyes widening as pieces began falling into place. "Michael Torres. You're Michael Torres." "I was," Michael said quietly, "before I became the guy who empties your trash cans." Victoria Chen was the first to recover her voice. "Michael Torres," she said slowly. "You wrote the foundational papers on behavioral cryptography. You hold 17 patents in network security architecture. You were nominated for the Turing Award in 2009. Michael nodded. "That was a long time ago." "But what are you doing here?" David Kim asked. "Why are you working as a janitor when you could be heading up security departments at any major corporation?" It was the question Michael had known would come, the one he'd been dreading for 3 years. The answer involved explaining about Sarah, about the accident, about the depression and guilt that had destroyed his career and his life. It meant revealing wounds that had never properly healed. "Sometimes life takes you in directions you don't expect," he said finally. "I needed to step away from the tech world for a while. The janitorial job gave me time to think, to process some things. I meant for it to be temporary, but temporary has a way of becoming permanent." The known answer satisfied no one, but Michael's tone made it clear he wasn't going to elaborate. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room as people tried to reconcile the man who had just dismantled military-grade security with the invisible figure who had been cleaning their offices for 3 years. Donovan was struggling with his own reconciliation. His carefully orchestrated demonstration of technical superiority had backfired spectacularly. Instead of proving that cybersecurity required specialized expertise, he'd been shown up by someone he'd dismissed as completely non-technical. His authority, his credibility, his entire professional identity felt undermined. "This doesn't change anything," Donovan said suddenly, his voice tight with embarrassment and anger. "So you used to work in tech? That doesn't mean our employees can suddenly become cybersecurity experts. That doesn't mean the human element isn't still the weakest link in our security chain." Michael studied Donovan's face, seeing the wounded pride and desperate need to salvage something from the situation. He recognized the feeling. He'd been there himself, years ago, when his own arrogance had cost him opportunities and relationships. "You're right," Michael said, surprising everyone. "The human element is often the weakest link, but not for the reasons you think." He gestured toward the audience. "These people aren't stupid or careless. They're smart, capable professionals who want to do the right thing. But you've spent the last hour telling them they're helpless, that cybersecurity is too complex for them to understand, that they should just follow orders without thinking." Michael walked closer to Donovan, his voice remaining calm, but carrying new authority. "You know what makes people vulnerable to social engineering? Feeling powerless and uninformed. When you tell someone they can't possibly understand security protocols, you're setting them up to be manipulated by anyone who claims to be an expert." The room was listening intently now. Michael had everyone's attention in a way that Donovan's technical demonstrations never had. "Real cybersecurity isn't about building perfect systems," Michael continued. "It's about creating a culture where everyone understands the basics, where people feel empowered to ask questions and think critically about unusual requests. It's about collaboration between technical and non-technical staff, not condescension and intimidation." He turned to address the broader audience. "You want to know the most effective cybersecurity measure? It's not firewalls or encryption algorithms. It's employees who understand enough about security to recognize when something doesn't feel right and who feel comfortable reporting concerns without being made to feel stupid. Janet from HR raised her hand tentatively. But how do we learn enough to be helpful without becoming cybersecurity experts ourselves? It was exactly the right question, and Michael felt a familiar spark of enthusiasm. This was the part of his old job he'd loved most, translating complex technical concepts into practical knowledge that people could actually use. Start with understanding the basic attack vectors, Michael said. Phishing emails, social engineering, physical security breaches. You don't need to understand the technical details, but you should know what these attacks look like and how they work at a high level. He moved to the whiteboard at the front of the room and began sketching simple diagrams. A phishing email tries to trick you into giving away your credentials by pretending to be from a trusted source. The technical countermeasures are important, but the human countermeasure is even more effective, taking 30 seconds to verify unusual requests through a separate communication channel. Michael's teaching style was completely different from Donovan's, where the CTO had used technical jargon to establish superiority. Michael used clear explanations to build understanding. Where Donovan had emphasized complexity and helplessness, Michael focused on simple, actionable concepts. Social engineering attacks rely on authority, urgency, and fear. Michael continued, drawing connections between different attack types. Someone calls claiming to be from IT and says your account has been compromised. They need your password immediately to fix the problem. What's wrong with this scenario? Several hands went up. IT should never ask for passwords over the phone, said Sarah from accounting. Exactly. And if there really was an urgent security issue, there would be multiple communication channels involved. Your manager would know about it, there would be official emails, the request would follow established procedures. Michael spent the next 20 minutes walking through practical scenarios, showing how basic security awareness could defeat sophisticated attacks. His explanations were clear, engaging, and most importantly, made the audience feel capable rather than helpless. But he was also aware of Donovan's growing agitation. The CTO was watching his authority evaporate in real time, seeing his carefully crafted image of indispensable expertise challenged by someone who could explain the same concepts better and more accessibly. This is all very interesting, Donovan interrupted finally, but you're oversimplifying complex issues. Real cybersecurity requires deep technical knowledge that can't be reduced to simple rules and checklists. Michael turned to face him. You're right that the technical implementation is complex, but the human interface doesn't have to be. The best security systems are the ones that make it easy for people to do the right thing and hard for them to do the samurai. Wrong thing. Easy? Easy? Donovan's voice was rising. You think cybersecurity should be easy? Tell that to the companies that lose millions of dollars because their employees click on the wrong link or use weak passwords. I think cybersecurity should be as easy as possible for the people who aren't cybersecurity experts, Michael replied evenly. Which is most of the people in this room. Your job as CTO isn't just to build secure systems, it's to build systems that regular people can use securely. The philosophical disagreement was becoming a personal confrontation. Donovan's professional identity was built on being the indispensable expert, the person whose specialized knowledge protected the company from threats others couldn't even understand. Michael's approach threatened that identity by suggesting that good security should empower users rather than emphasize their dependence on experts. You know what? Donovan said, his composure finally cracking. It's easy to criticize when you're not responsible for the results. You can stand there and give lectures about user empowerment and collaborative security culture. But I'm the one who has to explain to the board when systems get breached. I'm the one whose job is on the line when clients lose confidence in our security capabilities. The room fell quiet. Donovan had revealed more than he intended, showing the pressure and fear that had been driving his aggressive behavior. Michael recognized the signs of someone drowning professionally, lashing out at anyone who seemed to threaten their position. You're right, Michael said softly. The responsibility is enormous, and the stakes keep getting higher. But that's exactly why the collaborative approach matters. You can't protect this company by yourself. No matter how brilliant you are, you need everyone in this room to be part of the solution. He gestured toward the assembled employees. Look at what just happened here. You spent an hour trying to convince people they were helpless, that security was beyond their understanding. But when I explained the same concepts differently, suddenly they were asking intelligent questions and understanding the fundamentals. The problem isn't their capability, it's the communication approach. Donovan's jaw tightened. So now you're critiquing my presentation skills? You think a few minutes of simplified explanations make you a better cybersecurity professional than someone who's been doing this job for 15 years? I think 15 years of experience matters a lot, Michael replied carefully. But I also think that experience can become a liability if it makes you forget what it's like to not know something. You've been working with these concepts for so long that they seem obvious to you, but they're not obvious to everyone else. Michael walked back to the laptop he'd just compromised. Take this system, for example. You called it military-grade security, and technically you're right. The encryption algorithms are sophisticated. The authentication protocols are complex. The implementation required serious expertise. But the fundamental design philosophy is flawed. End quote. He pointed to the screen, which still displayed the system's unlocked interface. This security model assumes that complexity equals safety. The more layers you add, the more secure you become. But every layer is also a potential failure point. Every additional component creates new attack vectors. Donovan stepped closer, his professional curiosity overriding his wounded pride. The Cerberus protocol was considered revolutionary when it was developed. The peer review process validated the security architecture. The peer review process validated the theoretical framework, Michael Boss corrected. But theory and implementation are different things. When you build a complex system, especially one that has to integrate with existing infrastructure, you inevitably introduce compromises and shortcuts. Those compromises become vulnerabilities. Michael's fingers moved across the keyboard again, pulling up diagnostic information about the laptop's security configuration. Look at this implementation. You've got military-grade encryption, but it's running on a standard corporate laptop with known hardware vulnerabilities. You've got sophisticated behavioral analysis, but it's based on machine learning algorithms that can be fooled by carefully crafted input patterns. You've got biometric authentication, but the sensors can be bypassed through buffer overflow attacks. The technical details were flying over most of the audience's heads, but they could follow the general argument. Complex didn't necessarily mean secure. The point, Michael continued, is that security isn't just about having the most advanced technology. It's about understanding your actual threat model and designing defenses that address real-world attack patterns. And in the real world, most attacks succeed through human manipulation, not technical sophistication. Victoria Chen leaned forward in her chair. So, what would you recommend? How do we balance technical security measures with practical usability? Michael considered the question carefully. It was the same challenge he'd wrestled with throughout his previous career, the tension between theoretical security and practical implementation. Start with education, but make it relevant, he said. Instead of showing people how helpless they are, show them how they can contribute to security. Train them to recognize social engineering attempts. But also explain why those techniques work. When people understand the psychology behind phishing emails, they're less likely to fall for them. End quote. He moved to the whiteboard again and began sketching a different kind of diagram, one that showed information flow and decision points rather than technical architecture. Implement security measures that align with natural human behavior instead of fighting against it. Make strong passwords easy to generate and remember. Build systems that fail securely when people make mistakes. Create reporting mechanisms that encourage people to speak up about suspicious activity without fear of being blamed for false alarms. End quote. Michael was warming to the subject now, his enthusiasm overcoming the awkwardness of the situation. Most importantly, foster a culture of shared responsibility. Everyone from the CEO to the maintenance staff should understand that they're part of the security ecosystem, not because they need to become technical experts, but because security is fundamentally about trust and communication. As he spoke, Michael could see understanding dawning in several faces. The concepts weren't revolutionary, but the way he presented them made them accessible and actionable. This was what effective security awareness looked like. Not intimidation and demonstration of superior knowledge, but collaboration and shared understanding. Donovan had been listening with increasing agitation. "This is all very idealistic," he said finally, "but it ignores the realities of corporate cybersecurity. You can't just trust people to do the right thing. You need technical controls, enforcement mechanisms, audit trails. You need systems that protect the company even when employees make poor decisions." End quote. "You need both," Michael agreed. "Technical controls are essential, but they work best when they support good decision-making rather than trying to prevent all possible bad decisions. Perfect security isn't achievable, so you need people who can recognize and respond to unusual situations that your automated systems can't handle." End quote. The debate was becoming more philosophical now, touching on fundamental questions about trust, control, and human nature in organizational settings. But it was also revealing deep differences in management philosophy between the two men. "You talk about trust and collaboration," Donovan continued, "but I've seen what happens when security depends on human judgment. People get complacent. They develop bad habits. They convince themselves that rules don't apply to their specific situation. Eventually, someone makes a critical mistake. And when that happens," Michael replied, "what's more important? Having technical systems that can limit the damage, or having a culture where people feel comfortable reporting mistakes immediately so they can be addressed before they become critical breaches?" The question hung in the air. Everyone in the room understood that they were witnessing more than a technical disagreement. This was a fundamental clash between different approaches to leadership and organizational security. David Kim raised his hand. "Can I ask something? Michael, you obviously have extensive technical knowledge, but you've been working here for 3 years as a janitor. Have you seen security problems during that time? Things that might have been prevented with better communication or awareness?" It was a perceptive question, and Michael appreciated the opportunity to make his points more concrete. "I've seen quite a few things," he said carefully. "Passwords written on sticky notes. Computers left unlocked when people go to meetings. Conversations about sensitive projects happening in public areas where anyone could overhear. Confidential documents and trash cans that should have been shredded." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Several people were probably recognizing their own behaviors in Michael's list. "But I've also seen people trying to do the right thing," Michael continued. "Staying late to install security updates, double-checking email attachments before opening them, asking questions about unusual requests even when it slowed down their work. The foundation for good security culture already exists here. It just needs to be supported and developed." Donovan's expression had grown increasingly dark as Michael spoke. "So, you've been spying on us, taking note of security violations, building a case for why our current approach doesn't work." The accusation carried an edge of paranoia that surprised everyone. Michael realized that Donovan felt genuinely threatened, not just professionally but personally. "I haven't been spying on anyone," Michael said firmly. "I've been doing my job, which involves cleaning offices and common areas. I notice things because observation is part of staying invisible. But I've never documented anything or reported security violations to anyone." "Until now," Donovan shot back. "Now you're using that information to undermine my authority and second-guess my security policies." The room was becoming tense again, but this time the tension was directed at Donovan rather than Michael. People were beginning to see the CTO's behavior as unprofessional and defensive. Victoria Chen stood up. "Eric, I think we should take a break. This discussion has become more personal than it needs to be." But Donovan wasn't ready to back down. 3 years of frustration with security breaches, board pressure, and professional setbacks had found a focus in Michael's unexpected expertise. "No, I want to settle this right now. You all seem impressed by this demonstration. But let me remind you of something important." Michael Torres walked away from cybersecurity. He quit the industry and took a job emptying trash cans. That tells you something about his commitment to the work and his ability to handle pressure. The personal attack crossed a line, and the room's atmosphere shifted dramatically. Michael felt the familiar knot of pain in his chest, the one that came whenever someone pushed too close to the truth about why he'd left his previous life. "You want to know why I left cybersecurity?" Michael asked quietly. His voice was steady, but there was something in it that made everyone lean forward. My wife Sarah was killed in a car accident 6 years ago. She was coming home from work late one night because I was too busy with a critical project deadline to pick her up. It was raining, the roads were slick, and a drunk driver ran a red light. The confession hit the room like a physical blow. Michael had never spoken about Sarah to anyone at Zenith, had never explained the grief that had derailed his career and led him to seek invisibility in a job where no one expected anything from him. I spent 2 years trying to continue my career while dealing with the guilt and depression. But I couldn't focus on the work anymore. Every late night at the office reminded me of the night Sarah died. Every success felt hollow because she wasn't there to share it. Eventually, I realized I needed to step away from everything that connected me to that life. Michael's voice remained calm, but his hands were trembling slightly. The janitorial job wasn't meant to be permanent. It was supposed to be a place to heal, to figure out who I was, without my career identity, and my marriage. But healing takes longer than you expect, and sometimes you get comfortable with being invisible. The silence in the room was profound. Donovan's aggressive posture had deflated completely, replaced by obvious shame at having pushed Michael to reveal such personal pain. "I'm sorry," Donovan said finally. "I had no right to attack you personally. Whatever our professional disagreements, that was inappropriate." Michael nodded, accepting the apology. "The point is, you're both right and wrong about why I left. I did walk away from cybersecurity, but not because I couldn't handle the pressure or lacked commitment. I left because I lost perspective on what really mattered. I let my career consume my life to the point where I neglected the most important relationship I had." He looked around the room at the assembled faces, seeing understanding and sympathy rather than the professional judgment he'd expected. "That's actually why I think the collaborative approach to security matters so much," Michael continued. "When you create a culture where everything depends on technical experts working long hours and carrying enormous responsibility, you set people up for burnout and poor decision-making. When you distribute that responsibility and create systems that support human judgment rather than replacing it, you build something more sustainable." The philosophical argument had become deeply personal, but also more compelling. Michael wasn't just advocating for different security practices. He was speaking from experience about the human cost of unsustainable approaches to critical work. Janet from HR spoke up hesitantly. "Michael, I hope this isn't too personal a question, but do you think you might want to get back into cybersecurity work? It seems like you still have a lot to contribute." It was the question Michael had been avoiding for 3 years. The honest answer was that he missed the intellectual challenge, the sense of purpose, the feeling of building something important. But he also feared that returning to his old career would mean losing the hard-won peace he'd found in his simple, invisible life. "I don't know," he said honestly. "For 3 years, I've been focused on healing and finding perspective. I haven't really thought about whether I'm ready to take on professional responsibility again." Victoria Chen leaned forward. "What if you didn't have to take on the same kind of pressure you had before? What if you could contribute to cybersecurity in a different way, with better balance and support?" Michael realized that the conversation had shifted dramatically. What had started as Donovan's demonstration of technical superiority had become a job interview, with the entire company leadership team evaluating whether the janitor might be a valuable addition to their professional staff. "I appreciate the thought," Michael said carefully, "but I'm not sure how that would work. And honestly, I'm not sure Eric would be comfortable having someone with my background working in his department." All eyes turned to Donovan, who was clearly struggling with conflicting emotions. His professional pride wanted to reject the idea of hiring someone who had just embarrassed him publicly. But his intelligence recognized that Michael's skills and approach could genuinely benefit the company. "Actually," Donovan said slowly, "I think I might have been approaching this all wrong. You've made some valid points about security culture and communication. Maybe our department could benefit from someone with your perspective." The admission was clearly difficult for him, but Michael could see that it was genuine. Donovan was trying to move past his wounded ego and think about what would actually help the company. "What kind of role were you thinking about?" Michael asked. Victoria Chen answered before Donovan could respond. What about a security awareness coordinator? Someone who works between the technical team and the rest of the organization. You could develop training programs, conduct security assessments, help people understand how to be part of the solution rather than just following rules they don't understand. It was an intriguing possibility. Michael could see how such a role might allow him to contribute his technical knowledge while focusing on the human elements of cybersecurity that he'd grown passionate about. That could work, Donovan agreed, warming to the idea. We've been struggling with user adoption of security protocols. Having someone who can bridge the technical and non-technical worlds might be exactly what we need. Michael found himself seriously considering the offer. It would mean giving up the anonymity and simplicity that had been his refuge for 3 years. But it would also mean returning to work that mattered, using his skills to solve important problems. Can I think about it? Michael asked. This is a pretty significant decision, and I'd want to make sure I'm ready for the responsibility. Of course, Victoria said. Take all the time you need. But I want you to know that we'd be lucky to have someone with your background and perspective on the team. The meeting was winding down now, with people beginning to gather their belongings and engage in smaller conversations. But the atmosphere had changed completely from the beginning of the presentation. Where there had been frustration and intimidation, now there was excitement and possibility. Donovan approached Michael as the room began to empty. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Not just for the personal attacks, but for my whole approach today. I've been so focused on proving my expertise that I forgot my real job is to help people understand security, not to make them feel stupid. Michael extended his hand. We've all been there. The pressure to be the indispensable expert can make you forget that the best experts are the ones who can make complex things simple. As they shook hands, Michael realized that something fundamental had shifted, not just in his relationship with Donovan or his role at the company, but in his understanding of himself. For 3 years, he'd been hiding from his professional identity, convinced that returning to his former career would mean returning to the obsessive patterns that had cost him his marriage. But maybe there was a different way. Maybe he could use his technical skills without losing himself in them. Maybe he could find purpose and meaning in his work while maintaining the perspective that grief and loss had taught him. The next few weeks passed in a blur of conversations, planning sessions, and careful consideration. Michael had asked for time to think about the job offer, but he found himself increasingly excited about the possibility. The security awareness coordinator role would allow him to combine his technical expertise with his newfound understanding of human psychology and organizational dynamics. He also found himself working more closely with Donovan, who had genuinely embraced the collaborative approach to cybersecurity. The CTO's initial defensiveness had given way to intellectual curiosity about Michael's ideas and experience. I've been thinking about what you said regarding security culture, Donovan told Michael during one of their informal conversations. I realized that I've been treating security awareness like a compliance issue rather than an educational opportunity. People follow rules better when they understand the reasons behind them. Michael nodded. It's the difference between teaching someone to fish and just giving them fish. When people understand the underlying principles, they can adapt to new situations and make good decisions even when they encounter scenarios that aren't covered by existing policies. They were in Donovan's office, working on a proposal for a new security awareness program that would emphasize understanding over compliance. It felt strange to Michael to be sitting in the same chair where he'd once empty trash cans, now participating as an equal in strategic planning discussions. There's something I want to ask you, Donovan said, setting down the document they'd been reviewing. During your presentation, you mentioned that the Cerberus protocol had vulnerabilities that were never fully patched. Are those vulnerabilities still present in other systems? Should we be concerned about widespread security issues? It was a thoughtful question, and Michael appreciated that Donovan was thinking beyond their immediate situation to broader industry implications. Some of the vulnerabilities have been addressed in newer implementations, Michael said, but others are fundamental to the architecture. The problem is that fixing them would require completely redesigning the authentication framework, which most organizations aren't willing to do for systems that are already deployed and functioning. Michael pulled up a schematic on Donovan's whiteboard, illustrating the core design principles of the Cerberus protocol. The fundamental issue is that the system prioritizes complexity over simplicity. The designers assumed that more layers of security would always be better, but each layer introduces new potential failure points. As he explained the technical details, Michael realized how much he'd missed this kind of deep, analytical work. The intellectual challenge of understanding complex systems and finding their weaknesses was genuinely engaging in a way that his janitorial duties had never been. "So what would you design differently?" Donovan asked. It was exactly the kind of question that Michael loved to tackle. He spent the next hour sketching out an alternative architecture that prioritized simplicity and transparency over complex layering. The approach was radically different from current industry standards, but it addressed many of the fundamental vulnerabilities that plagued existing systems. "This is fascinating work," Donovan said when Michael finished his explanation. "Have you considered publishing these ideas? The cybersecurity community would benefit from this kind of fundamental rethinking." Michael hesitated. Publishing would mean returning to the public eye, engaging with the professional community he'd abandoned 3 years ago. It would mean taking ownership of his expertise again and accepting the recognition that came with it. "Maybe," he said finally, "but if I do decide to come back to this work, I want to do it differently than before. I want to maintain balance and perspective. I don't want to lose myself in the work the way I did before." Donovan nodded thoughtfully. "I think that's exactly why your perspective would be valuable. The industry needs people who understand both the technical challenges and the human costs of this work." As Michael left Donovan's office that evening, he realized that he'd already made his decision about the job offer. The conversation had reminded him why he'd loved cybersecurity work in the first place: the intellectual challenge, the sense of purpose, the opportunity to solve important problems. But it had also shown him that he could approach the work differently, with the wisdom that came from loss and recovery. The next morning, Michael knocked on Victoria Chen's door. She looked up from her computer with a smile, clearly recognizing the determined expression on his face. "I'd like to accept the position," Michael said simply. "Security Awareness Coordinator. I think I'm ready to get back to work." Victoria's smile widened. "I was hoping you'd say that. When can you start?" "How about Monday?" Michael replied. "I think it's time for me to stop hiding behind a mop and start solving problems again." The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was profound. Michael's first few weeks in his new role involved developing training materials, conducting security assessments, and gradually building relationships with colleagues who had known him only as the invisible janitor. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People who had been intimidated by Donovan's technical presentations found Michael's explanations accessible and actionable. His approach of building understanding rather than demonstrating superiority created an environment where people felt comfortable asking questions and reporting concerns. "You know what I appreciate most about working with Michael?" Janet from HR told Victoria during a casual conversation. "He never makes me feel stupid for not understanding something. When I ask questions about security policies, he explains them in ways that make sense, instead of just telling me to follow the rules." That sentiment was echoed throughout the organization. Michael's collaborative approach was changing the culture around cybersecurity, making it a shared responsibility rather than something imposed from above by technical experts. But perhaps the most significant change was in Michael himself. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely excited about his work. He was using his technical skills in service of something larger than personal achievement, helping to build an organization where security was a collaborative effort rather than a source of anxiety and intimidation. 3 months into his new role, Michael published his first paper in 6 years. It was a comprehensive analysis of human factors in cybersecurity, drawing on his experience at Zenith to illustrate how technical solutions could be designed to support rather than replace human judgment. The response from the professional community was immediate and enthusiastic. "Torres is back," read one industry blog, "and he's bringing a perspective that the cybersecurity field desperately needs." The recognition felt different this time. Instead of validating his personal brilliance, it represented the value of ideas that could genuinely help organizations become more secure. Michael found himself invited to conferences and workshops, not as a technical guru, but as someone who understood how to make cybersecurity work in the real world. Donovan had also evolved in his approach. Working with Michael had shown him the limitations of his previous leadership style and helped him develop new ways of communicating technical concepts to non-technical audiences. "I realize now that I was using complexity as a barrier rather than a tool," Donovan told Michael during one of their regular planning meetings. "I thought that proving how difficult cybersecurity was would make people respect the work more, but all it did was make them feel helpless and excluded." The partnership between the two men had become one of mutual respect and complementary skills. Donovan brought deep technical expertise and industry knowledge, while Michael contributed organizational psychology and communication skills. Together, they were building a security program that was both technically sophisticated and humanly sustainable. 1 year after the infamous presentation, Zenith Technologies had become a model for effective cybersecurity culture. Client confidence had been restored, security incidents had dropped dramatically, and the company's approach was being studied by other organizations seeking to improve their own security posture. Michael stood in the same conference room where his life had changed, preparing for another company-wide presentation. But this time, he was the presenter, and his message was very different from Donovan's original approach. "Security isn't about technology," Michael told the assembled employees. "It's about people. Technology is just a tool that helps people make better decisions and respond more effectively to threats. The most sophisticated firewall in the world can't protect an organization whose people don't understand their role in maintaining security." End quote. As he spoke, Michael could see the engagement and understanding in his audience. These weren't people being lectured about their inadequacies, they were colleagues being invited to participate in something important. "Every one of you is a cybersecurity professional," Michael continued. "Not because you need to understand encryption algorithms or network protocols, but because you understand your work environment. You know when something seems unusual, and you have the judgment to ask questions and report concerns." After the presentation, as people filed out of the conference room, Victoria Chen approached Michael with a satisfied smile. "You know," she said, "when Eric first challenged you to hack that laptop, I don't think anyone expected it would lead to this kind of transformation. Not just for you, but for the whole organization." Michael looked around the room where his invisible life had ended and his professional resurrection had begun. "Sometimes the best changes happen when you least expect them," he said. "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters." As he gathered his materials and prepared to return to his office, Michael reflected on the journey that had brought him from grief-stricken exile to renewed purpose. Sarah would have been proud of what he built, not just the technical innovations or professional recognition, but the way he'd learned to balance expertise with humanity, achievement with perspective. The invisible janitor was gone, replaced by someone who understood that the most important problems couldn't be solved by individuals working in isolation. They required collaboration, communication, and the kind of wisdom that only came from understanding both success and loss, both technical brilliance and human frailty. Michael Torres had found his way back to cybersecurity, but more importantly, he'd found his way back to himself. And in doing so, he'd helped an entire organization discover that security wasn't just about protecting systems. It was about building trust, fostering understanding, and creating communities where everyone could contribute to something larger than themselves. The story that had begun with a mocking challenge and 30 seconds of typing had become something far more significant. A testament to the power of hidden expertise, the importance of human dignity, and the possibility of transformation that exists in even the most unlikely circumstances. In a world where technology often seemed to diminish human value, Michael had shown that the most powerful solutions came from combining technical excellence with genuine respect for the people who made organizations work. As he walked back to his office, Michael smiled, remembering the shocked silence that had followed his unexpected demonstration. But the real victory wasn't in the hacking of a laptop or the revelation of hidden skills. It was in the building of something sustainable and collaborative, something that honored both technical expertise and human wisdom. In the end, that was the most sophisticated hack of all, The transformation of an entire organizational culture through the simple recognition that everyone had something valuable to contribute.